Hi, I'm Reece McDonald. I'm a professional cycling coach. My qualifications are undergrad in human physiology and biochemistry with an honours and masters in exercise science. My current roles are I'm a partner at Science of Sports and professional coach there. And then I'm also the performance coordinator for Mbuko Pro Cycling. And yeah, I manage a host of athletes ranging from recreational to professional, road to mountain, various disciplines. And I essentially also work in the lab at Science Sports. We have a lab in Cape Town and Girona. I sort of run the Cape Town lab where we do performance testing and cycling biomechanics.
What got you into this line of work?
Actually, I've always been interested in exercise science and physiology, even since school. And I actually, even when I was in grade 11, I was looking at honours programs already. And funny enough, the honours program had my current colleagues in them lecturing. So yeah, I was like, I want to be taught by those guys, and that's exactly what happened. So I essentially started coaching just out of school, actually in rowing, and then from there transitioned into cycling because my honours was with Dr. Duran Swart. And we looked at cycling biomechanics and effective different positions on muscle activity. And then basically from there, I got into the lab doing bike fits, biomechanics, performance testing, because my honours thesis involved a lot of that. And then from there, because of the rowing background, they actually asked me to come on board as a coach. And then I was doing both for quite a while. And then when lockdown or COVID started, the great relax, I actually went fully into cycling from there. So I've been coaching for over a decade now, but cycling only for about, I'd say, 7 years.
And if there's anyone interested to pursue this sort of career, is there a specific institution better suited to go and do your sort of formal education, studies, etc.?
I think a qualification or a degree definitely helps, especially in physiology or biochemistry, understanding the nuances of how the body actually works, because essentially what you're doing with training is exactly that. You're manipulating how the body functions and responds to different loads and workloads. And then also in turn with that, understanding how all of the systems integrate together. So, anyone can prescribe training, but understanding how the body will respond to that, who you're dealing with, recovery, etc., other variables is incredibly important. Adding to this, the research background helps you analyze and understand things objectively, as opposed to just seeing fads and info that out there that you think might work, but actually really delving into what and why and the mechanisms is incredibly important. From there, I think anyone can coach. If you have that background, you don't need that background. I mean, one of my colleagues is incredibly successful. He works at Bora Hansgrohe, Red Bull. And he doesn't actually have a formal background or education like the rest of us. But I mean, he's one of the best coaches in the world. So I think coaching is an art, a mix of science and art. So you need the people skills, understanding humans, understanding how motivation works, how people work, but you also need to understand the physiology, the background, the science behind training.
And what institution could you go to study that at? Is it could you go to any university to study that? Where does someone go?
I'd say university is probably the best solution or sort of starting point. But I mean, you can do basic courses. I mean, even our company, we offer a basic coaching course, which just gets you started on the fundamentals and basics of physiology, coaching, training, etc. But yeah, definitely any typical university, I think, would have a very good undergrad program, and then from there specializing or going further into honors and masters. But I'd say any standard university with anything physiology or biochemistry related is probably the way to go. Sports science is a little more practical, but you still get a good covering of the physiology and principles. But I would definitely focus more on the research side of things. So having a more, for example, exercise science is different to sports science in the fact that it's more research-based and it's very heavily reliant on that, whereas sports science is a lot more practical and understanding sort of more team sports-based applications, where, as I said, exercise science, you're focusing on the research, the fundamentals, which you can apply to anything. It's not just about one sport or learning some practical measures on top of the sort of physiology side.
Do you have any aspirations to advance in your studies? Are you looking to do any more courses or anything like that out of interest?
I've done my master's, as I mentioned, in exercise science. I don't think I would be pursuing anything at the moment because, research is very time consuming and you need to be really dedicated to it because you don't want to get to the point where you start research and then you are still busy with it 10 years later. Believe it or not, writing up is probably the hardest part, but research, there's a nice little infographic map of what research is actually like, and it's this beautiful picture when you're writing it up in the beginning, but there's a very long, deep, dark road through Mordor and everything else that eventually gets to this lovely little thesis that everyone reads at the end of the day. So I think research, you've got to be very committed, and at the moment I'm practicing a lot more time just on the coaching side. So I just don't have enough time availability to put into the research just yet, but a PhD will probably happen on the cards at some point, but I don't think in the foreseeable future, no.
And lastly, is there any coaching or academic heroes that you aspire to be like or look up to, or that inspire you as a coach and as an academic? Because there's obviously a strong connection between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too involved in the academic side at the moment. I mean, a lot of the researchers at SM, or it's now called HPALs, where I studied, are really good in their respective fields, and I think they're all just great role models into their own disciplines. But I mean, personally for me, I mean, my colleagues are my role models. You know, we all work very closely together. We're all, they're incredibly successful in all their fields. You know, we have multiple coaches or colleagues in the world tour and in professional cycling, mountain biking and road. So I'd say my colleagues are probably the guys who I aspire to be like the most and take the most motivation from. We all work pretty closely together. So I would definitely say those are probably the guys I'm most close to. I don't necessarily pay too much attention to other coaches all around the world just because there's so many of them. Like obviously you're always looking at info and data and stuff like that, but I mean, I'm not as probably clued up on that side of things as they would be being in that space. So I'm not in the world tour professional space internationally, even though I do coach international riders. So I'm probably not as, in there as them. So for me, they're probably the guys I would say are where my motivation ends, or role model side ends.
If you could have access to anyone's training peaks, who would that be?
Well, training peaks would probably imply they're involved in cycling. I mean, I would say like a lot of the top world tour guys are always nice to see what they do and the numbers they can push out, and the type of training loads they can handle. I'd like to see Chris Froome's one, just so I can see what he's doing at the moment, because he's kind of fallen off the radar. So. No, I'm joking. I mean, like, I think like having access to the best guys training in the world would always be cool, just to, not necessarily the training that they're doing, but more so just the, exactly what, like looking at their data, understanding exactly what their foundations are and their characteristics, what they do in training versus how they respond in racing and all of that, and just putting two and two together. So, I mean, you could name any of the top world's best, I'd say.
If you wouldn't mind rambling on for a little bit about why you think it's important for any athlete, amateur or elite, to consider coaching.
Yeah, I think there's many variables to this answer, or many ways you can explain this answer. But I mean, I think probably the most important one for me is just the longitudinal progression. Anyone can train hard for a couple months to a year, but having that sort of progression over year, if you're an athlete starting at X, having that progression over the years to get to a point where you are now at Y, and how you get there is incredibly important, and you can go completely the wrong way or the right way. In terms of short-term performance, doing the right sessions, recovering well, analyzing the sessions correctly, and ensuring that you're doing the right thing at the right times, not overdoing it, which is probably the biggest trend in training, is just overtraining. Rather be under than overcooked. It's a good saying, but it's definitely true, and fresh is fast. That's I think that's probably one of the biggest changing trends in modern cycling is freshness and not overdoing it. We'll get on to trends a bit later, I think, but I mean, so I'll leave that one there for now. But I think just longitudinal progression, making sure that year on year you're improving. As you improve and adapt, the stress needs to change, and knowing how to change and manipulate that, what to keep similar, what not, is incredibly important. So that's why I think a good skilled coach who understands physiology and people is incredibly important. And one of the biggest killers of athletes is monotony. So doing the same thing all the time. Training is obviously a balance of having fun and then monotony. You got to have the right type of monotony. But if you have too much fun, you'll have too much monotony as well, as in if you're just riding, doing whatever, and that might just mean you'll never improve. But obviously, coaching isn't for everyone. You know, some people just enjoy that and they just want to ride as they feel, which is completely okay. As I said, there's many facets or sort of variables to that answer, but I mean, those are off the top of my head.
And for someone that hasn't been coached, let's say, you know, I've just got into cycling, I've ridden for a few months, I've decided I want to do the Cape Town cycle tour and sign up with Science to Sport. I get assigned to Reece Mc Donald.
Good luck.
What does that look like? What does the first kind of month to 3 months look like? What should someone expect?
Yeah, I mean, it's always tricky when guys or anyone signs up for a program, for example, for 3 months, because, you know, as I said, training is the layering of sort of building to an event or making an athlete better is the layering of training over time, you know, and that's a learned effect, and then also just actual training, you know. So learning how to train better takes years, and learning how to train well and really get the most out of your sessions takes time. It doesn't just happen in 3 months. So I mean, there'll always be an initial progression. So, you know, if someone started now for cycle tour, obviously it depends on what they've done prior, but I mean, it would essentially just be trying to get the correct building blocks in place as sort of well as possible for March. I mean, if you live in Cape Town, one of the best things you could probably do is route recce, so actually know the course, know the climbs. And the cycle tour, if you look at it simply, is actually just 3 or 4 4-minute efforts, you know, 5-minute efforts, 6 minutes efforts, depending on your strength. But you basically just be able to make those selections because within there is a lot of flat, fast terrain. So basically it would just be building up the correct foundations over the next few weeks and then working into more specific work as you get to the event. But as I said, there's so many layers that you can add over many months to years of training that I don't think anyone would get the most out of themselves in 3 months, depending on their level. But you could get in a pretty good place and be as prepared as possible by March. So as I said, we'll be just going through the basics, ticking the boxes, making sure that the correct fundamentals are in place to do specific work before the event, make sure fueling is in place, make sure that you have a correct strategy, make sure you've done seeding races so that you actually start in the best group possible, because a big factor in road racing is drafting. So if you are starting at the back in PA, like when I did my first cycle tour at 10:30, you're not going to go very fast, but if you're starting at 6:30, you're going to go much quicker. So that's pretty much how I think you could probably prepare. But everyone's different, so I think it really depends on your starting level, what your goals are for the event. If you're doing the women's race as well, it's a much shorter race, different dynamic, different efforts compared to the general one.
While we're on the topic of cycle tour, someone that isn't being coached by you, if they were thinking about 3 or 4 of the most important things they could be doing between now and the race in March, keeping in mind what you just said, which is 3 months is a limited time in the world of cycling. But any top tips for someone heading to the Cape Town cycle tour, and let's assume they're at a amateur to weekend warrior sort of level?
Yeah, I think if we had to name 4, I'd say firstly, ride your bike. That's probably the biggest factor. Make sure you're training, make sure you're on the bike. Take an easy week, at least 3-4 weeks out from the race. Just deload, very easy rides, short rides, just so you freshen up from whatever work you've done now in January, so that you'll carry that freshness into March. It might not feel like it in the first week, but when you need to do the selection efforts in the race and really push, you'll have that freshness in your legs. Practice your fueling that you'll do on race day, very important. You need to train your gut and teach your gut how to respond to whatever fuel you're using. Big misconception is people fuel on water only, and then they get to a race and they use carbs and they think carbs are bad because their stomach says not today. But it's actually, you need to train your gut to use that fuel. So a big factor is actually training your gut from now. Cycle tour isn't really a hot race, so you don't really have to worry about the heat too much. Maybe if you're more near the back end of the field, trying to do a few more rides in the heat while using your race fueling, because at the end of the day, your body will respond differently to carbohydrates whether you're in the hot or cold. So understanding that temperature relationship is also important. I would definitely do a few specific efforts closer to the race. So as I said, cycle tours, 4, 5, 6 minute efforts, depending on your level, very short climbs. So you're just going to be able to make those selections. So I would just throw those sort of efforts into your training once or twice a week. Nothing more than that. So, start with longer efforts now. In that recovery week, deload, and then build into the more intense efforts 2 weeks before. The week before, 1 or 2 little very short, intense efforts, and then easy on race week with 1 or 2 efforts just to open your legs up. But yeah, specific work a bit closer, and make sure you have those top end efforts. And then fourth, I'd say do some group rides, do some races. Just make sure you have the overall race conditioning in your legs, because sometimes you can have your best prep possible into a race, but racing isn't training. It's very different. So understanding how to get the most out of yourself physically, mentally, understanding the performance anxiety around racing is also incredibly important. If you never race and you've trained your best your whole life, and you get to cycle tour, you might completely freak out. Your body just doesn't work. Something's not right. You're not used to the feeling, the emotions, the selection efforts, the leg speed, the neuromuscular mechanisms. So just basically get some conditioning in your legs and your head, so that when you come to race day, you don't do anything different. You know your routine, you're relaxed, and your body's ready to perform the efforts that you need to do in racing. Because as I said, racing isn't training. Training, you're building the foundation and the work, but to put that into racing is a different sort of skill, and you can't just go from A to B directly. There does need to be a transition and some sort of conditioning work over the few weeks into the race.
Going back to the coaching and the trends, you mentioned that there's what was valuable or perceived as valuable 30 years ago is somewhat different 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Maybe take us through the journey of coaching, what has been and what you think is likely to happen as a trend for 2025.
I think I'll just go straight into what I'd say the biggest trends are at the moment, and obviously how that differs, because there's a few theories and training models that people kind of use. I'd say that one of the biggest changes in training at the moment are what's kind of been happening, but now is more analyzed and evident. I'd say there's 4 current trends, or sort of ways that 2025 is really going to be sort of very apparent in this, particularly with research and what sort of evidence is coming out. But firstly, pyramidal training is the way to go. So polarized, the Norwegian method back years ago, yes, it was seen as the way, but in reality, polarized is actually incredibly difficult to achieve. And it's not actually how training works and how physiology works, in my opinion. So pyramidal is the way to go. Basically, in a 3-zone model, 70 to 80% of your work is done in low intensity or zone 1. Zone 1 being zone 1 and 2. So we're thinking of a 3-zone model here, not a 5-zone model. Then 10-15% in zone 2, and the last little bit in zone 3, or your high intensity work. Zone 2 being sort of threshold work. Below that, sub-maximal work. And then as I said, zone 3 being, high intensity, very hard work. So that's the first one, is that pyramidal training is definitely the way to go. The second is the change in volume. Training volume is incredibly important. It's one of the biggest predictors of how sort of top-end endurance performance, because the more you train, the better, to a point. Everyone's different. But years ago, cyclists used to do, if we're looking at cycling specifically now, hours and hours on the bike, massive long rides, and that's completely changing. If you look at the professional space, riders are doing 18, 20 hours a week in the World Tour. They're not doing massive long rides, massive weeks, 30, 35-hour weeks anymore. So racing is changing, and so does the way we need to train and the way we stress the body. And we're realizing you don't need that type of volume to become fast and to become better. The third is fueling. Last year I think was very apparent, but we're really starting to figure out how the gut responds to fueling and how we can change and manipulate the gut to get more in and essentially make ourselves faster. And that ties into durability work. So basically, durability is just essentially how much of your own highest level can you maintain after riding for 3-4 hours, just as a very simple example. So, if you think about a race, you have the selection efforts in the start. You don't necessarily go fast at the end. Everyone else just slows down. So how much of a percentage of your best can you maintain at the end of a race? That's what durability is. So how durable is your body? Most people just fall off a cliff. So fueling ties in with that, but also the training, which I mentioned now. And then fourthly is actually heat. So people are understanding a lot more about heat and how we can use heat training to manipulate internal mechanisms. So blood change responses, hemoglobin responses, plasma volume. So we actually call heat training these days the poor man's altitude camp. So you can get in your trainer at home, or you can sit in a sauna and punish yourself, and you'll get really good blood change, sort of metric changes, and that can obviously make you better and faster, but also handle heat better. So yeah, those I think are the current trends which we'll see more of this year, and I think a lot of people are really catching on to it, and I think the level of athletes as a whole is just going to continue to improve just because of the factors which I mentioned.
Reece, there's a lot of misconceptions around enjoying training whilst working with a coach, balance and enjoyment off the bike. You want to maybe just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think one of the most common things I hear just riding, and I think a big misconception in the sort of recreational training space is that coaching or training is like quite a strict regime, and it's not really fun in a nutshell, or like inverted commas. But I think it's completely the opposite. And I think if you have the right balance of work and understanding why you're doing something, and getting the buy-in and feeling the benefit is fun in itself. But having balance, having off time, having the correct recovery periods, having some free rides, and trying to just incorporate what you find enjoyable about your riding into your training, then that's where personalized coaching really takes another step up, because everyone's different. Some people want to train exactly to the T every single session. Other people want a little more freedom, and that's when I think personalized training is incredibly important, and why humans, as I said in the very beginning, humans aren't robots, and taking that personal element of what you enjoy about your riding, whatever it is, adding that to your training can make it incredibly fun while progressing, because being fit and being the strongest you've ever been is also a very fun and incredible feeling. Riding faster than your mates or keeping up with them or whatever your goals are. I think there is that element of you can have a lot of fun while training well and training under a program. And it doesn't mean that you have to be incredibly strict. And if you think about like an investment, if you put 80-90% in, you're probably going to get a good return. Same with training. You don't have to do everything perfectly, but if you're on the right progression over time and you're ticking the boxes and you're enjoying yourself and you're having fun, that's obviously going to get you to the best sort of space at the end of the day. You don't have to race either. I think a lot of people think you need a coach because you want to race. I coach a lot of people who actually never race at all. They just want to train and they want to enjoy themselves. They want to feel good. They want to ride with mates, and that's also perfectly okay. So I think don't feel shy to want to improve if you feel like or don't feel shy to wanting to improve if you feel like you don't want to race or you aren't going to race, because that's not necessarily needed at all. Obviously, racing is great training stress and it is fun. Everyone loves going fast, but you don't have to race to train well and to feel better on the bike.